Just imagine it. A city where 40,000 people were cooking dinner, laughing and sleeping. And then, by sunrise, the only things left were shadows burned into the stone. We open on the desolate ruins of Mohenjo-Daro. The silence here is, well, it's heavy and suffocating. You see, this wasn't just a slow decline. It was an erasure. I'm taking you into a cold case that's 4,000 years old, where an entire civilization vanished in a heartbeat, leaving behind questions that mainstream science is, frankly, too afraid to answer. I mean, what could possibly turn a thriving metropolis into a radioactive graveyard in a single night? As I look at these crumbling walls, I realize we aren't just looking at an ancient city, right? We are looking at a crime scene. A crime scene where the evidence suggests a level of destruction that, strictly speaking, shouldn't have existed for another 4 millennia. Thoughtful. Intense. Usually, when a city falls, there's a story of struggle. Broken gates, arrows lodged in walls, signs of a desperate last stand. But here, there's only the silence of the grave. Probing. Mysterious. You have to ask yourself, how does a sophisticated society, one with advanced plumbing and grid-like streets, simply cease to exist between dusk and dawn? Somber. Haunting. The skeletons found here, they weren't buried in cemeteries. They were found scattered in the streets, some holding hands, as if they were just walking home when the world simply ended. Firmly. There are no signs of a massacre by an invading army. No sword wounds, no blunt force trauma. Nothing. Whispering. Suspenseful. It's as if they were struck down by an invisible force that they never saw coming. Urgent. Grand. I want you to look closer at the stone itself, because what I'm about to show you, well, it challenges everything we've been told about our past. Authoritative. Grand. When you find vitrified brick and levels of radiation that rival modern nuclear sites, you begin to understand why the textbooks prefer to stay silent. Low. Chilling. This was the midnight silence of Mohenjo-Daro. And the truth is far darker than any myth. Something happened in those early morning hours that defied the laws of the ancient world. And I'm going to help you find out exactly what it was, grandly, with a hint of skepticism. For decades, you see, we've been fed a comfortable lie, intense and low. Mainstream archaeology wants you to believe that the end of Mohenjo-Daro was just a slow, agonizing crawl. A predictable result of a shifting river or maybe a seasonal drought. Sarcastic. They call it a gradual decline. A neat little phrase that fits perfectly into a textbook, right? Measured. They point to dried up wells and changing trade routes as the logical explanation for what a thriving metropolis turned into a silent tomb. Dismissive. It's a clean story. I mean, it's one that doesn't require any uncomfortable questions. But the logic fails. The very moment you step onto the ground and look at what was actually left behind. I want you to understand just how advanced this place actually was. Epic and authoritative. We aren't talking about some primitive settlement. Mohenjo-Daro was a marvel of the ancient world. In awe. It featured a sophisticated grid system and indoor plumbing that wouldn't be seen again for millennia. Proud. These were people who mastered urban planning and sanitation, while the rest of the world, well, they were still struggling in the mud.
So, if this was really just a slow migration caused by a drying river, why did they leave their most precious belongings behind? If you have years to plan a move, you don't leave your jewelry hidden in the walls or your pottery sitting right there on the table. You don't just stop. In the official records, the heartbeat of the city doesn't fade out, it's cut off. The official story is a smokescreen. It's a way to keep us from looking too closely at the evidence hidden in the dirt. They want you to focus on the climate so you don't see the patterns of a catastrophe that defies every rule of history. Because you see, as I looked closer at the original excavation maps, I realized there was one detail the mainstream narrative completely ignored. A detail that suggests the people of Mohenjo-Daro weren't running away from a drought. They were running for their lives. I'm looking at data right now that defies, well, it defies every law of Bronze Age history, and quite frankly, it shouldn't even exist. Grand storytelling tone. You see, when researchers began digging into the deeper layers of Mohenjo-Daro, they didn't just find pottery and tools. They found an anomaly buried deep in the very soil of the city. I'm talking about layers of vitrified sand, rock that has been fused into green glass by intense, unimaginable heat. To achieve this, you need temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This isn't the signature of a seasonal drought or some common house fire. Conspiratorial whisper. It's the aftermath of an event we aren't supposed to know about. Even more chilling is what lay scattered in the streets above that scorched earth. I want you to imagine, right? Walking through these ruins and seeing skeletons left exactly where they fell thousands of years ago. These people were buried. They were caught in a moment of pure terror. Some were found huddled in corners, others were found lying in the middle of the road, often holding hands, as if they were seeking comfort in their final seconds. There were no signs of a military invasion, no sword wounds, and no signs of a struggle. It's as if their life force was vaporized instantly. But here is the detail that changes everything. When investigators tested these remains, they found radiation levels 50 times higher than natural background levels. I'm looking at the evidence and it points to a sudden, catastrophic thermal event that matches the profile of a modern tragedy. But how could this happen 2,000 years before the invention of the steam engine, let alone the atomic age? The mainstream narrative tells us this was a simple collapse of a river civilization. But the glass and the sand and the radioactive bones, they tell a much darker story. And yet, as impossible as a prehistoric nuclear event sounds, physical evidence is only one side of the coin. Because when I looked into the ancient local legends, I realized the survivors might have actually left us a written record of the weapon that caused this.
I want you to, look closely at what archaeologists found scattered across the streets of this silent city. They call them death poses. These weren't ritual burials, right? Gravely. These were men, women, and children caught in the middle of their daily lives, lying in the middle of the road, some holding hands, others cowering in the dark corners of their homes. But here is the part that, it literally keeps me up at night. There are absolutely no signs of trauma. Analytical. There are no marks from swords, no arrowheads embedded in bone, and no shattered skulls from maces. It wasn't a massacre by an invading army, you see? It was a sudden, agonizing end that froze them in time. Thoughtful. When I searched for an explanation that fits this level of instant, total devastation, I found myself looking away from the sanitized history books and toward the ancient Sanskrit epics. Intriguing. In the Mahabharata, there is a description of a weapon that sounds hauntingly familiar to a modern ear. Grand storytelling. It speaks of a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. Awestruck. An iron thunderbolt that reduced entire races to ashes, producing a light brighter than 1,000 suns.
The text goes on to say that the fire was so intense, it caused the hair and nails of the survivors to fall out and turn the very food in their bowls to poison. Think about that for a second, right? Incredulous. Thousands of years before the first nuclear test in the deserts of New Mexico, an ancient text is describing the exact, specific biological symptoms of acute radiation poisoning. Is it just a coincidence, actually, that every surrounding settlement in a 40-mile radius vanished at the exact same moment? For me, this wasn't a localized fire or a predictable flood, you know? Somber. This was a blackout zone. A massive geographic scar where life simply ceased to exist in the blink of an eye. We are tracing the timeline of a high-tech cataclysm, a moment of prehistoric total war that has been systematically scrubbed from our modern records. But even if the historians want to ignore the scorched earth and the radioactive bones, they can't ignore the final piece of this puzzle. The one detail that proves this wasn't just an accident of nature, but a targeted strike. However, there was one detail everyone missed, buried deep beneath the city's foundation. I've spent years, literally years, looking into the cracks of history, and this detail, well, it changes everything. With wonder, beneath the very foundations of this lost metropolis, archaeologists didn't just find silt or clay. No, it was something else entirely. Gravelly and serious. They found a layer of vitrified glass, sand that had been blasted into a crystalline state by temperatures reaching thousands of degrees. Dismissive. This isn't the result of a kitchen fire or some tribal raid. Darkly, it's the signature of a thermal wave that our ancestors, frankly, shouldn't have been able to trigger.
I mean, when I look at the evidence, the accident of nature theory, it completely falls apart. You just can't explain away the epicenter, an area where the heat was so intense it literally melted the stone walls of the buildings. And then there are the victims. I've seen the photos of those 40,000 souls. Or at least, the ones who were vaporized instantly. They were found lying in the streets. Some holding hands, others shielding their eyes, as if the sky itself had suddenly turned into a furnace. There were no weapon marks, no crushed skulls from falling debris, only the silent, invisible killer of high-level radiation. When researchers finally brought Geiger counters to the site, the needles didn't just flicker, they screamed. Some of those bones are still radioactive to this day, thousands of years after the hearts within them stopped beating. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro aren't just a tomb, you see. They are a warning. If a civilization as advanced as this could be wiped off the map overnight, leaving us to guess that fate for 4,000 years, well, you have to ask yourself, what are we building today that will be nothing but a radioactive mystery for the people of tomorrow? We like to think we're the first to master the elements, but the vitrified sand tells a different story. A story of a forgotten peak and a terrifying fall. The truth is out there, buried under that scorched earth, waiting for those brave enough to look beyond the official narrative. I'm going to keep digging into these anomalies, and I want you there with me. So, if you want to dive deeper into the secrets they tried to bury, hit subscribe and join the investigation. Tell me in the comments, do you think this was a prehistoric war? Or is there something even darker hiding in our past? Because some shadows never